Welcome to Bridging the Education Gap, the podcast where parents, teachers, and education leaders come together to share insights, stories, and strategies that connect learning at home and in school. Whether you're a parent navigating homework struggles, a teacher fostering classroom breakthroughs, or an education leader seeking innovative solutions, this is your space to learn, grow, and collaborate. Each week, we dive into real conversations about education, from tackling pain points to celebrating success stories, all with one goal: to bridge the gap and empower every child's learning journey. I'm your host, Jessica Shelley. Let's get started. Today, we have an incredible guest joining us, Maurice McDavid. Maurice is not only a dedicated school principal, but also a passionate advocate for culturally responsive education and leadership. He co-hosts the Black, Brown, and Bilingual podcast, focusing on uniting and empowering Black and Brown communities, and is also a soon-to-be published author, bringing his expertise to the forefront of educational change. With years of experience as a middle school Spanish teacher, an administrator, and an educational consultant, Maurice has been deeply involved in fostering identity-affirming and linguistically responsive pedagogy. Today, we're excited to discuss strategies for building meaningful partnerships between schools and families, valuing the diverse languages and dialects spoken at home, and ensuring that communication between educators and parents is truly collaborative rather than hierarchical. Maurice, we're so excited to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. Okay, let's start off with telling us a little bit more about yourself and your journey into education.
Yeah, absolutely. So born and raised actually in the district that I get to call home and serve, currently small town about 60 miles west of Chicago. Went off to college at Knox College down in Galesburg, Illinois. Originally went to be a pre-law student. My goal was to be the first Black president. When I was a junior, President Obama ruined that. And so I had already changed my major anyways. So, ended up in education. I got closed out of a political science class and went and took a class called A School and Society. During that class, we went and saw the movie Freedom Writers, in which Hilary Swank's character says I was going to become a lawyer, but by the time you're defending a kid in the courtroom, it's too late, and the real battle's in the classroom. And I legit went and signed up to be an ed major the next week. And so for me, education, I think, has always been about more than just curriculum, right? In terms of the written curriculum, it has been about justice and equity, and ensuring that people from all walks of life, whoever comes into my classroom, has a fair shot at having success in this great country. So that has been really what's driven me. Again, taught, went back, got my master's in principal leadership. I've been a dean, a AP principal. This is actually my second principalship. And then during my last principalship, finished up my EDS. So I'm certified to be a school superintendent, but I don't know that I'm ready for that yet, because I'm still working on my mouth. Sometimes I say things that you can't say when you're the leader of a whole district.
Oh my goodness. And I think you had mentioned before, you're currently serving as principal of 2 buildings. Is that right?
Yeah. So fortunately, that interim experience has come to an end.
Okay.
At the time that we are recording, we've gotten they pulled an AP from another building, and she's going to be the interim for the end of this year and all of next year, and then they'll officially hire, but she's going to get in and do a great job. That 3-week tenure of both working to open my building, which will open in the fall of 2025, and covering a building, it was a challenge, and one that I really appreciate all of those experiences, though. It allows me to learn something in each of those experiences.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I remember when we first connected, I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know how you're doing it all. So
yeah.
Glad to hear that it's a little bit moved forward from then. But let's talk about your podcast that you're on. So you co-host the Black, Brown, and Bilingual podcast. So what inspired you to start that, and what themes do you really focus on in those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I co-host that with really one of my best friends. Her name is Lisette Jacobson, and she's the director of MLL curriculum in a neighboring district. Her and I actually both started our teaching career here, and then we really became good friends, though, during our principal prep master's program. And so we would be outside. She is, I should mention, because it's part of the title, right? She is Latina, the daughter of Mexican immigrants who worked hard so that way she could kind of get to where she was, right? But we would be out in the parking lot having these, after our master's classes, having these deep conversations. And we jokingly said one day, like, we really should be recording these, bro. Like, these are, and COVID happened. Everything kind of slowed down for everybody. And, we were able to take that time and invested in some mics and bought a, RSS feed, and the rest is history. So we've been up and running since July of 2020 is when we dropped our first episode. And I'm Black, she's brown. We're both bilingue, both fluent Spanish speakers, fluent English speakers as well. Thank goodness. But we think really have covered a whole gambit of things. We've talked about family. We've talked about being leaders of color. We've talked about, we're both actually married to white identifying Americans. And so we've talked about being in interracial relationships. We've kind of hit it all, parenting, but we definitely have kind of centered in on the Black and brown community. In our earlier seasons, really talked a lot about the Black-brown divide. We actually got an opportunity to interview a guy by the name of Nicholas Baca, who is the author of The Presumed Alliance, that talks about the presumption that Black and brown communities work together on things, and actually sometimes there's this competition that exists, right? And so I'm getting a chance to kind of talk about those types of things. Ultimately, we're educators, and so it always comes back to us, or for us, to education, and what are some of the things that we can be doing to support our Black, brown, impoverished, immigrant populations in our school buildings.
Amazing. Yeah. And I really want to dive into that. I think as the core kind of focus for our time together today is really that work that you do that emphasizes honoring like the students' home languages and their cultures that you see in your school buildings and, society at large. So why do you think that it's so critical in today's schools to really have that kind of focus and emphasis on, home languages and culture?
Yeah. So one thing I will say about language, and of course I'm going to forget who the author of this book is or this quote, but one of the things that is often forgotten is that language is really twin skin with identity, right? And so that you can't talk bad about somebody's language without also ultimately insulting their identity. Jeff Foxworthy, comedian from the Blue Collar Comedy Tour back in the early 2000s, but he's quoted as saying, anytime people heard me speak with my Southern accent, they wanted to deduct 100 points from my IQ. Right? And so from accent to dialect, right, to then languages other than English. Of course, even this week, we saw our president adopt English as our national language when we've gone 200 plus years of not having an official language, right? So again, some of those things that we need to consider is that language is part of people's identity. So I think that's number one. I think number two is that language ultimately is how students learn, right? And so the way that we talk about language itself, the way that we utilize language to get learning to stick, right? And making learning stickier so that way students will keep it. The truth of the matter is that 90% of what our brain is receiving, we receive visually. And so, right, how can we then utilize language to support all of those different pieces? I think all of those pieces are really important, not to mention just the idea of, right, that identity affirmation, that cultural affirmation, being able to understand that me speaking a second language or me speaking a second dialect does not make me less than. In fact, it makes me more, it gives me access to more than one world instead of only one world.
All right. So I would love to take that one step further and explore any strategies that you have for how educators can ensure that they're actually validating students' linguistic identities while also supporting academic language development.
Absolutely. So I think part of it is how you just started there, which is the way that we talk about language, right? And I'll share with you, like, my mom was actually guilty of this. She would say things like, well, no, we use proper English or we use good English. And so in doing that, what we have done is we have added value to language. We've said this is proper or this is good, inherently identifying then things outside of that as bad English, right? Or improper. And the problem with that is I receive love in that language, right? I've been raised hearing, well, ain't nobody talking to you, right? And I understand that does not meet the standard for American English, but it's not wrong. It's not improper. In fact, it's gives me access to another right culture, another group of people. So what I will say is, number one of the ways that you can affirm is that you can acknowledge that there are differences between home language and standard American English is the way that we talk about it when we are writing about it or talking about it in our podcast is standard American English. These are the standards that we're expected to teach inside of schools, standards that will allow you then access to the business world or to the finance world or to, right, being able to talk about it that way, but that you don't have to talk down about African American vernacular English, about Chicano English, right? Or there's actually Appalachian English, right? You don't have to talk down about that because each of those dialects actually have their own set of rules and their own set of standards. I think the second thing you can do is you can utilize that to teach standard American English. Right. So in a dual language program, you might do some translanguaging and you may say, well, in Spanish, we would say this, right? And it differs and you do some compare and contrasting based on in Spanish, you can have two no's in the same sentence, right? No me gusta para nada. I don't like that at all, right? Or I don't like that none, or, is kind of the English translation. But you can talk about the fact that in English, right, in the American Standard English, we would say, I don't like that at all, instead of I don't like that none. Because American Standard English says you shouldn't use the double negative, by the way, which is a completely made up rule somewhere in like the 1800s. Do some research on that because that's a whole thing too. But yeah, so I think that there are some ways. I think, again, number one, it starts with acknowledging, right, second language and second dialect as an asset, not a deficit. And then secondly, it shows up in the ability to then use that other language, right, as kind of a teaching point. I'll say one thing that we actually don't mention in our current writing, but I could see as a kind of a next chapter is youth language, right? Because youth culture is really kind of a culture in and of itself. Now, I'll be honest, a lot of it is rooted in hip hop culture or African American culture, but youth language, right? Skibbity, Ohio, right? And he's got Riz and, they call me the Rizzler, all of these things, right? If you don't understand those as an educator, or even as a parent, you may miss out and think like, what are you talking about? What is skibbity, bro? Like, and so again, being able to bring those in as attention grabbers, as ways to, skibbity is to Mr. McDavid as cool is to, you know what I'm saying? Some of those ways to really use language for instruction.
Oh, I love that. The creativity too, that really kind of opens up doors and kind of like levels that sort of foundation too. Like there is no right or wrong. There is no one language is better than another language. It really is like these are our unifying pieces of culture of our communities and being able to leverage that for education and for teaching too.
I'll say this real quick. I'll just say some people, again, actually, the skibbity stuff is referred to as brain rot. Some people think about language and slang as this decay of language, but the truth is that it really is just the adjusting of language. When we look at a word, for example, like zoo, if you were in the 80s, you would say, I'm going to the zoological garden. Zoo is technically a slang word, right? It's a shortening of something that was a more formal word, and at one point would have been considered slang, but today is considered a regular part of our language, right? The advancement of language has to happen. There was no way to talk about .com prior to there needing to be .com, right? And so today, a hashtag, right? We used to call it a pound sign. Hit the pound sign on the phone, right? And today it's a hashtag. So again, all of these things are ongoing. And
that's a great point too. And I think too, as we talk about how language is connected to identity, you had mentioned a great example too about your own experience with your mother, like that's not proper, right? So I want to take a step back too and think about these other stakeholders that are involved in the child's life. So, in your book, you had talked about communication in schools. Can you share some of those strategies for ensuring that communication is truly two-way and not just hierarchical, especially when it comes to communicating with parents and kind of illuminating them on your kind of position and perspectives of how education is how language is treated in the building?
Yes. Former principal at a dual language elementary school, and I would regularly have conversations with some of our parents from Spanish-speaking homes who felt like they wanted to remove their child from dual language and focus just on English, because they understood, right? The reality was that there is political power in English. And so they were like, well, if they're not moving quick enough to get to English, then forget the Spanish. To which I'm always like, no, 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 no. The ability to be bilingual, right, at an academic level, right, not just social, at an academic level, really opens up doors. So I think that's number one. I think the second piece is one of the things that we talk about in our book is to challenge our staff to consider linguistic bias. Okay, we talk about bias in other places, right? I mean, bias is a scientific reality. Right. It's I want to be very clear for anybody listening who's like, oh no, that's one of those leftist words. No, bias is a scientific reality. Our brains are literally designed to be able to make snap decisions based off of this limited information. And that's what bias is, right? If I say you ate a fast food cheeseburger, your brain is probably thinking of golden arches. Why? Because that's bias, right? So anyways, I say all of that to say, when we hear someone speak with an accent, what are we thinking about their intelligence? What are we thinking about their care? If I hear someone speaking African-American vernacular, which, by the way, consider the idea that part of language and communication is more than what we say. It's more than verbal. It is paraverbal, and it is also our body language. And so if I got a mom and she's rolling that neck and she's using some words that don't fit standard American English, what have I assumed, right, about that parent based on their communication? If we're willing to do that and take a step back and say, no, this mom is up here advocating for her child, just like I would be, right? Now, all of a sudden, it changes the communication and I can learn to listen better, because part of our work is to, right, in challenging this communication, is to listen with more than just our ears, but to watch and then to think about it from a lens even outside of just the lens that we have from our own personal experience, right? What is this mom really asking for? What is his dad really asking for, right? When there's that linguistic barrier and the dad who speaks only Spanish, has his second grader translating. He's still here. He's present. What are they telling us beyond the things that we might look at through our, lens of, well, I would have done it this way. Yeah, okay, great. You're not the only person, right? And your culture isn't the only culture. And so how can we really be adjusting? I think that's one of the biggest things we can do as schools is to listen. And we've got to be intentional about that. We have to create systems and structures for that. So for example, one of the things I'm going to do at my elementary school that opens in the fall is we will have what will be called the Mitchell School Council, which will be an opportunity really for parents to participate in the school improvement process. So parents, community members, grandparents, students, teachers will kind of form this Mitchell Council and get a chance to hear from one another. And when we do that, it changes, right, my ability to make a quick snap decision and say, well, they just don't even care.
So true. What a powerful sort of unification too of your community as you build and kind of forge forward as a new school building with new students, new staff that are all kind of coming together, and then also engaging those community stakeholders. That sounds like an incredible sort of experience. I'd love to be in the room like a fly on the wall as you have some of those meetings. So you had already mentioned some of the different strategies, that leaders and teachers can take in order to be more culturally responsive. But do you have any other actionable ways that they can make their classrooms maybe more culturally responsive as well?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Number one is that every single teacher is a reading teacher. I need you to view yourself as a reading teacher, right? View yourself as a language teacher. As we were writing this book, we were looking for a title that wouldn't limit it to people who were like just reading or language teachers, right? And so one of the things we really want is for educators to view themselves as language teachers, right? Across the board. Again, because it is the avenue through which we are often trying to communicate our learning objectives and standards and all of those different pieces. I think another strategy is to really, again, work on building your understanding, right, of language in and of itself, understanding how it is ever adapting, understanding how you can utilize some language structures to help, again, take learning and make it stickier. So for example, the use of analogies and metaphors is a great way to get learning and connect it into what they already know, right? We understand, according to learning strategy by neuroscientists, that really There's this thing called the memory loss curve, right? Which you get this lesson today, and by the next day, you've lost 60 to 70% of it. How do we get it to stick? Well, there's a couple of things, right? Number one is getting it to connect to something we already know. So using a metaphor to say, okay, Bach was to Beethoven as Drake was to, Kendrick. They beefed sometimes. And again, I don't know if that's actually a good example because I don't know if Bach and Beethoven were around at the same time. But anyways, that ability to connect it into something that is culturally relevant for the young people sitting in front of us. I'll share just kind of one last thing, and I think this is one that we need really just across the board is being intentional about how we are teaching vocabulary. And part of that is rooting vocabulary in, again, actual lived experience in the use of vocabulary. So not just here's a list, here's definitions, make it happen. No, when I'm teaching that science lesson, don't you tell me, oh, the stuff floated away. No. The gas escaped, right? The liquid turned into a gas. We're using that specific vocabulary intentionally, getting students to really, again, build that because it also is building that understanding of the content through the explicit use of vocabulary. The other thing is that the reality is that when our students, regardless of what state you live in, when they go to take that state test, it's going to have vocabulary on it. And if that's the first time seeing kids, or the kids are seeing it, right? What an addend is, in the mathematics, what the divisor is, right? If that's their first time seeing it, we've set them up to not have as much success, right? So making sure we're getting that grade level vocabulary to our students, regardless of what level they are reading or doing math at, they need grade level vocabulary to be able to even come close to accessing the assessments that they're going to be expected to take.
That's a great piece of information too, that kind of academic vocabulary that is interwoven into lessons, but then sometimes we don't come back and actually review it or have them practice it, or as they're responding in class, leveraging that kind of academic vocabulary in the conversation. So I would love to kind of tap back into the parent side of things real quick. And you had mentioned, the father that comes into the school, and that just already shows that he's trying to advocate for his child. So what are some ways, or what would you tell the parents that are listening for how they can reinforce their child's linguistic and cultural identity at home while also supporting their academic success too?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the ability to have the conversation about the fact that the language is different. It's really easy when it is literally a different language, right? And we are going to communicate in Spanish, I'll use because I speak Spanish, my wife speaks Spanish, my kids do not. So sometimes we tell adult secrets in Spanish, but they're starting to figure it out. So when it's a whole separate language, I think it makes a little bit more sense. It's a little bit easier. You can read and write in that language as a way to support it at home. You can read in this language and then write in the other language, right? And do some of those things, or discuss it in a language. Tell me what you read today in English class, but explain it to me in our home language, right? And being able to do that. But I think explicit conversation around the fact that being bilingual is an asset, right? Parents, tell your students, right? This is a blessing, not a curse. If someone tells you, well, you just don't know that word in English, yes, but the counterpart doesn't know any words in Spanish, right? So a mind that is bilingual, even if it's missing a vocabulary word or two in one language or the other, still has in total way more words because I can say both mesa and table, right? So I've got way more words there in terms of vocabulary. I think that for home dialects, I think that's where it becomes a little bit more challenging because we have been convinced as a culture that that's broken English, that's messed up English, and so I've challenged my mom. It's a new way of thinking.
Awesome. Okay, so can you tell us more about your upcoming book and what educators and school leaders can expect to learn from it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are very excited to be publishing with Times 10 Publishing, which is kind of known for all of their hacking school discipline, hacking culturally responsive teaching. And so ours will be along that series, but it won't be a hacking book. It actually is going to be called, sorry, give me just a second. I want to make sure I get our title exactly right because it's a long title, but it will be called Your Words Are Fire. 10 culturally responsive teaching strategies to speak the language of belonging and help students learn, express ideas, and solve problems. And your words are fire is what we're going to call it, right? And so we really liked that idea because we want educators to know that your words have the ability to bring warmth, but your words also have the ability to burn. Your words have the ability to give light, and your words, when not controlled, have the ability to create destruction, right? As we've seen, right, unfortunately, in our nation now on both coasts. So really thinking about how we are intentionally using language, and ultimately our job as educators is to produce student learning. And I don't know that we talk enough about that. I'll just go back for just a moment to some of the work of Dr. Gloria Latson-Billings, who was kind of the originator of the expression culturally responsive pedagogy. Or culturally relevant pedagogy. And she talked about there really being kind of three main factors in terms of culturally relevant pedagogy. And number one is a focus on student achievement. If you have diverse books in your library, but your diverse students can't read them, you're not being culturally responsive, right? Like, we actually need to be producing some outcomes. And so ultimately, those are some of the things that we kind of talk about in this book. And what educators can expect is an easy to read, like the Hack Learning series. I can go specifically to the one strategy I want to look at. There's things you can do today. There's, the hack in action, where we are, talking about some experiences that we've had utilizing that strategy and making it work.
Amazing. And then before we part, any final advice for educators, parents, or school leaders striving to create a more inclusive and responsive learning environment?
Yeah, here's my advice. I think particularly in our current policy environment, stick with it. Stick with it. It is work worth doing. And even though it is hard work, it was hard work already. And I'm sure that sometimes right now where we are being told to not even use expressions like culturally responsive, it's research-based, it makes a difference, and it is worth doing the work the right way to positively impact both the children in our homes and the children in other people's homes, right? In terms of being an educator. And so it's going to just make a positive difference, I think, for our country and our society. As I mentioned at the beginning, I love this place. And it's because I love this place that I'm able to offer some critiques and say, hey, here's some ways that we need to continue to get better. And so keep with it. That's my ending advice.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much, Maurice. This conversation has been incredibly insightful. Your passion for culturally responsive education and your dedication to building strong school community partnerships and practical strategies for supporting multilingual and diverse learners are really, truly inspiring. And I know to our listeners, whether they're educators, school leaders, or parents, they'll take away so much value from everything that you've shared today. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Bridging the Education Gap. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with others in your community. Join us next time as we continue to explore how educators and parents can work together to empower every child's learning journey.